There is a lot of hype around Final Fantasy XVI. The action, the story, and the Final Fantasy-ness of it all. It seemed too good to be true, and then they dropped the demo and it took over the internet. It was the perfect demo that captured the hearts of a lot of returning fans and new fans for the first time. It made me pre-order the game and my hype was at an all-time high, but after playing the game, I have thoughts. There's a lot to love about Final Fantasy 16, but also they did a lot of things that left me kind of, So is Final Fantasy 16 worth the hype? Let's talk about it. Hello world and all who inhabit it, it is I, the Great Seiran, and I don't care if you consider Final Fantasy 16 a Final Fantasy game or not. I've only played and finished Final Fantasy 7 Remake and the most recent Crisis Core on Nintendo Switch. I don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to this argument, but it does seem to me that this is Final Fantasy since most of the common tropes are present throughout the game. I'm looking at Final Fantasy 16 as a $70 PS5 exclusive that had a lot of hype around it. I want to talk about if it lived up to that hype and if it's indeed worth the price of admission. There were three main things that were super hyped and some of them super controversial about this game: the full-on switch to action combat, the amazingly engaging story, and his visual prowess and performance. The Square Enix and Sony tag team hype was admittedly very convincing, and this game lives up to a lot of what they promised. We're gonna break down these aspects of the game and talk more about them in detail so you can make the decision if this game is worth the hype or just overrated. And of course, I'll give my opinion towards the end of the video. Let's start with action. This game is full of it. There are moments that slow down and we kind of drag through dialogue and fetch quests, but for the most part, this game pushes along very well. The combat has been made to seem like a button masher, and there have been viral disingenuous clips of the combat with some loser playing the game with one hand and beating a boss. That guy had auto dodge, auto heal, timed slow parries, and other accessibility features enabled to show a skewed view of this game's combat. And he was at the very first part of the game where you have next to no abilities and are literally a child. It's weird that Final Fantasy fans launched this smear campaign on 16 just because it didn't have turn-based combat, when Final Fantasy, from my understanding, hasn't had full turn-based combat since 10 and 2001. Now I know that it's still a type of turn-based gameplay, and personally I really enjoy Final Fantasy 7 Remake's active time battle system, but I don't think turn-based combat is what makes Final Fantasy good. That's a bold assumption. The combat is very smooth. There are basic combos you can do with a single attack button, and while you can just use those to beat enemies, you want to throw in your magic button, which for me is triangle. You'll shoot a ball of elemental magic, and using it inside basic combos creates a more complex, damaging elemental combo. As you progress, you'll interact with more elements and have some that fit your playstyle more than others, which to me is based on the ability of the element which you trigger with circle. I love the Phoenix Shift ability. Being able to skirt around the battlefield and take out multiple enemies in the blink of an eye is my playstyle. I love being able to perform long combos on one enemies, but I'd rather pull out some AoE moves, then flash over to another enemy, beat the snot out of him, and then go back to my original target. To me, that mimics real combat, since if I'm surrounded by 8 enemies, they're probably not going to let me get this super long flashy combo off, and the enemies in Final Fantasy 16 don't. They hit you hard. Now that's just one ability I like to use. Another is Garuda and her ability to grab enemies and bring them back close. A lot of my special abilities blow enemies away, so being able to grab them and bring them back in to finish my combo or bring larger enemies to their knees and create a mini stagger situation is really useful. The special abilities that you can use when you hold down R2 and press either square or triangle are very customizable as well. I don't like the Phoenix's uppercut thing, so I bought another skill with ability points and swapped it for a move that creates a huge wall of fire plus 2 large fiery slashes. I like to lead with it for crowd control, then focus on the biggest, toughest enemies while Torgal and whoever else finishes off the small fry. I also didn't like the Garuda aerial spinning cuts thing. I felt like it whiffed a lot and I was missing out on big damage on staggered enemies. I swapped it for Rook's Gambit, which is just a step back, then a lunging kick that does big damage fairly quickly. There are bigger, more explosive moves you can equip in these slots as well, but they come with a longer cooldown. I would have loved to have had a separate button for those, because as much as I like the AoE explosive Phoenix attack that also restores health, it makes me feel like I'm wasting a slot, since I can only really use that maybe twice per boss battle, but if it were any other move, I can make several combos out of that slot. Regardless, Clive's combat is amazing, flashy, and customizable, being able to equip different elemental moves on different icons. For instance, Titan can hold one of Rama's moves in his slot, or Phoenix can hold one of Garuda's. There's no limit to the customization, and if you go based on what you've seen online, you may miss it. Also, Clive gets his awakening pretty early on in the game, and it's so sick. The coolest thing about Final Fantasy 16 are these icons and dominance replacing traditional summons, and the fact that you can fight as them. Now you can't transform into Ifrit whenever you feel like it, but the dedicated fight sequences with these giant monsters are breathtaking. You will think you've peaked at the Garuda fight, but the game just keeps evolving the combat, making every change into Ifrit that much more enjoyable. I expected it to be a gimmick of the game, but no. It is legitimately some of the most well thought out, choreographed, and sequenced fights in the entire game. I can't wait to turn to Ifrit again to see what he manages to pull off with me behind the controls. It's not cinematics and button mashing, it's me making these things happen. I only wish they took the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm route and had several different inputs and rewards for how fast you respond to quick time events and fights, but they stuck with pressing square, mashing square, or pressing R1 to dodge cinematically. Still though, it's an awesome time. Okay, that was a lot on the combat, but damn it, they did a good job. The combat is the main interactivity of this game, but the story is what hooks you and pulls you along, or at least it should be. It's really hard to play that demo and not be intrigued as to where the story is going to go. At every turn, it widens and the plot thickens. The story starts out with you as a young man, and you experience the day that leads up to your brother's death at your own hand. Then we go to real time and there are real world events going on around you, so you're back in the action, but we don't necessarily realize what's going on. We get the opportunity to talk about what's going on and understand more about Clive currently, and realize that he doesn't know he killed his brother, he doesn't know about his ability to turn to Ifrit, and he doesn't know his mother is a no-good snake. We realize these and other things I don't want to spoil and see this crazy tale unfold. There are enemy nations, betrayals, magic, and there are time skips, which every great story has. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the story is great, but it does get a little convoluted. But apparently that's a normal Final Fantasy thing. The voice acting is amazing and the cinematics have a lot of love and emotion in them. That's not because of how great the PS5 handles the visuals, which we'll get into later. It's because of art direction and how these actors bought into the story and what's going on in this world. It may not be the greatest story ever told, but as someone who usually pays just enough attention to stories to understand what's going on, Final Fantasy 16 has me hooked, and with lovable characters aside from Clive like Jill and Torgal, it's easy to fall in love with this world. I've seen some people hate on the story, especially the ending. I can't necessarily say it's the best conclusion, and without spoiling too much, all I can really say is that it's not the best aspect of this game, but it's not bad. Most other things are just comparatively much better. Talking about story and story focused games is really hard. I don't want to spoil anything, but I also need to explain to you why the story is good or bad. I have made separate spoiler-filled story reviews of games like Tears of the Kingdom, which is still my current game of the year. Be sure to check out that video after watching this one. Okay. Combat, story, cute puppy dog turning badass wolf. I think we're ready to talk about this game visuals and how it performs. Now, this is always the most hyped part of any game release. I personally don't care for visuals as much as frame rate. Don't give me an ugly game and don't give me an unperformant game. Give me great visuals with amazing performance and I'm happy. Final Fantasy 16 did not make me happy. Now, this game isn't a bad performer. I think it does amazingly well in the combat sequences and closed off corridor levels. It's beyond that where it gets iffy. The open areas are a bit rough around the edges, and in performance mode they target 60 FPS but in actuality fall short. Also, the motion blur that's added and can't be turned off looks horrible. I really can't believe Square Enix won't allow you to turn that off. I played this game on my gaming monitors and on my TV just to be sure it wasn't me and my setup. It looks better on a TV, but some TVs can add frames and use magic to make your games look better. I realize this because every time I mention how performance is on a console game, I get yelled at. I'm not saying Jedi Survivor levels of bad performance, but that's a very low bar. That game sucked on launch. The expectations were high for a $70 PS5 exclusive being brought to us by an established publisher and partner of the Sony platform, being heralded as a guaranteed Game of the Year competitor, as the directors and producers of this game said over and over again how this game could only be made with the power of the PS5, and that Sony's master devs even put in the time and effort to help create this game. Are those expectations fair? Yes, we have God of War Ragnarok running above 60 FPS in a mode that sometimes hits 120, and that's a game that I would argue is more visually impressive than Final Fantasy 16. Even if the combat and other things are maybe more intense, the world isn't even that large in scope to bring the frame rate to its knees. Every world in God of War and even Jedi Survivor seemed larger in scope, and in Jedi Survivor's case specifically, more interactable. I hate automatic jumps, and I hate not being able to use my sword, magic, or whatever else to interact with the world. I really had the impression that it'd be more like, and please don't kill me for this, Forspoken. I could use my powers and abilities in that open world to traverse and explore, and I really wanted to be able to do that in Final Fantasy 16. Like, why can't Garuda's grab launch me over chasms? Or Titan's punch that allows me to break through rocks and access previously unreachable areas? It's a choice that I feel like they left out, but for no reason. The game does nothing new in this space. It's an amazing hack and slash with a great story and cool side quests, but that doesn't mean the performance should be where it is. It isn't unplayable at all, and I'm not ragging on the entire game based on this one thing. But if we're talking about hype, then yeah, I'm gonna call it out every single time. They told us this game didn't need a day one patch, but after playing for hours and hours, I'm begging for one with a few changes that I think would make this game amazing. First, let me change my button mapping to whatever I want. It's 2023. Not having these kinds of accessibility options is very annoying. Second, give me more control of the visuals besides a brightness slider. I don't want motion blur. Let me turn that off. And third, give me more open area optimization. Like I said, the game isn't unplayable and the performance isn't god awful, but for this game to be made for the PS5 and PS5 alone, and for you to be Square Enix, the developer who makes games for the PS5 and PS5 alone, I don't want to see any frame dips below 55 FPS. The other gripes I have about the world and everything else, we can't patch that out, so I'm just gonna leave it alone. So did Final Fantasy 16 live up to the hype? No, absolutely not, in my opinion. But honestly, what game can? This is a phenomenal experience and one of my favorites of the year. It's definitely worth your hard-earned $70, no question. But if you gave me a performance 60 FPS 1440p Jedi Survivor and a 60 FPS 1440p Final Fantasy 16, I'm 65% sure I'd pick up Jedi Survivor. Final Fantasy 16 is amazing, but it doesn't do anything new. It shows us that Final Fantasy could be a multitude of things and it's not in a box. I loved my time with Final Fantasy 16 and I will recommend it to anyone who asks, but yeah, that's my opinion. Yell at me in the comments. Be sure to check out some of my other videos like my Jedi Survivor review, and also be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.